Hello, beautiful internet people. Today's video is a project video that I designed to be something kind of quirky, kind of silly, but very, very beginner friendly. I'm going to walk through a bunch of code, all of it straight out of the API docs, to turn this guy into Mister Moody Mk1. This is a Hue Go LED light. It's a portable color change LED thing that has googly eyes on it because googly eyes. And what we're going to do is we're going to use speech recognition and sentiment analysis to turn him into an LED mood light. For the ADHD impatient people, much like myself, there are GitHub links for all of the code I'm about to show. If you want to just jump straight over to that, please go ahead. But, do me a favor and hit like before you go and, maybe let the video play in the background. For the rest of the crowd, let's dig into the code. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is set up a scaffolding in the project, set up requirements, set up a couple of different basic function stubs. One to record the audio, one to convert the audio to speech to text, one to get the sentiment of the text, one to turn the sentiment into a color, and then let's wrap all that into a job. This took about 5 minutes or so total, but let's do it in about 30 seconds. So the next thing that we're going to need to do is to actually record some audio. This snippet that I'm using is straight off of a Pi Audio help file. I honestly have no real clue how it works, but it sets all the default settings and then it sets a default record time of 10, does all the magic to get all the different chunks, put them into frames and put them into a stream, and then outputs them as a WAV file and closes all that up. We don't really need to think too much about this here. At this point, I'm ready to do a little bit of a test recording, so I try to do that. It fails, so I realize I need to go and clean up all of my parameter passing. So we do that real quick, get all the parameters, putting all the functions linked, and then I'm ready to run a recording. And I did a little bit of silly recording, and it worked, so now I was ready to move on to the next section. Next up, we're going to go ahead and try and convert the audio into text. To do that, we're going to use the speech recognition library. This library has 3 or 4 different ways it can work, but we're going to use the default Google one, so it does require an internet connection. We're also going to use the PyDub module to split the audio. This sample is again straight out of the documentation for this library. We recommend reading the docs. Next up, now that we have text, we're ready to use the NLTK library to convert it. So we do our imports, do a little cleanup of the code to make it pretty so PyCharm doesn't yell at me. And then we go ahead, and this is actually just a one-liner, really straightforward, return SIA polarity scores based on input text. Again, straight out of the documentation for NLTK. So now that we've captured audio, converted it to text, and converted the text into a sentiment score, we're ready to actually set the color. But before I do that, I want to set up a little bit of a scheduler to run this on a loop so that it'll pick up the voice every few seconds and go ahead and convert that. So here's a speed run of setting up a scheduler. Once I had the scheduler set up, I ran a few test runs, saying some weird things into the mic over and over, trying to test the high and the lows on the polarity scores. And once I had that set up and seemed like it was pretty trusty, I was ready to go ahead and move on to setting up the Hue API. I'll do a separate video on the Hue API. It can be a little interesting, and there were a lot of things that I had to figure out, like I had to buy a bridge. But overall, it is pretty straightforward. To access the Hue API, I am using the .env setup. I cut that out of the video because you don't want to show people your passwords and keys, but we're pulling all of that in through the .env, and then I'm using light number 4 that I happen to know from setting up the API originally. Like I said, I don't want to dig into that because it's confusing here, but short story is you have to set the light number, you have to set the IP number, and then what I'm doing is I'm setting it to a default color as soon as I initialize it. The last thing we have to do, of course, is to actually take our scores and convert them into colors. So this is really simple. If it's basically less than 0.1, that's going to set to a blue. If it's greater than 0.1, it's going to set to a yellow. Okay, so the Hugo is next to me on the desk, and it's in its neutral color. It'll stay there until it starts to pick up on if I'm being positive or negative. So I start to say happy things like, I love going to the beach and I have a beautiful wife. It'll start to turn yellow and be sunny and happy and beautiful. And this is so wonderful and it's great. And it'll stay that color as long as we keep saying really positive things. Now, if I start to talk about negative things like broccoli sucks, they're stupid little trees that nobody wants to eat, it'll turn a blue because we don't want to, because it's negative and it's so, but we have to keep being negative. If I switch and I start being positive and like being happy and everything is good and everything is wonderful, it's going to turn back to yellow. And it'll do this about every 4 seconds or so. Mr. Moody Mk1 and myself would like to thank you for joining us in this video. And if you made it this far, we have some more fun videos right over here.